So Mrs. Bookin, Brocho bas Michoel. I would only sit down, please do so. Better known certainly to Annie and myself as grandma, as great-grandma to my children, Auntie Nita, and to hundreds, perhaps probably thousands of former students, simply Mrs. B. A mum to my Uncle Lady, who sadly isn't well enough to be with us in Israel, and my mum, mother-in-law to my father, Kaviva and Ruth Alea Shalom. So many different things to so many different people. I often go to shivers, and probably found this yourselves, that one of the things that happens is you have fond memories and sometimes amusing stories, and people laugh, and there's often laughter, and then people say they feel guilty laughing. It's a sad occasion. I think I've come to the conclusion that this is the sort of the Jewish experience, that things don't fit into neat boxes, and often things are bittersweet, and we do cry sometimes on happy occasions, and we're happy sometimes on what should be sad occasions. In about 2.5 weeks, we'll mark Tisha B'Av, and those of you that have it on your Seder board, you'll have no tap on it, because strangely, although it's a very sad day, we know it's also Yom Tov. We miss out certain prayers that we would miss out for Yom Tov. How can a day of destruction, the day that is such a sad day in the Jewish calendar, also be Yom Tov? Maybe it's also this idea that often we have a mixture, that things are never necessarily black and white. We have this experience ourselves. I sadly was not able to be here, Grandma's Revival. Huge thank you. People say you're not supposed to thank people. Just heard that Diane and Troy, I said you're allowed to thank you. But thank Ian for all that he did and for the words that you said on that occasion that were very comforting for Mum and for the family. The reason I wasn't here is we were marking our son's 3rd birthday as an option, and as we have a large community, we invited about 1,000 people. They didn't all RSVP. But somebody said to me, "Can you move it?" I said, "No, it's not just like, the family and the close friends." I said, "There's going to be lots of people there." My mum said, "No, you must go ahead." But it was a very bittersweet occasion, because as we were celebrating a milestone for our son, we were also saying goodbye to Grandma. So these things often seem to coincide. We made a bar mitzvah recently. I was looking around, and it was a very sobering thought to see, Stephen's daughter Helen was there, my parents were there, a number of other cousins and family. And I'm looking around, remembering my own bar mitzvah 30-something years ago. And all the people that were there, of course, have passed on, and it was the next generation. But it was nice also to all be together and to remember, bring back so many memories. I think it's fair to say, probably not just for me, but there are 2 words that people were sort of banding around when Grandma passed away. One was legend. So many people just said she was a legend. Not in the sort of colloquial, slang sense, but really a real legend. And an institution was a word that a few people used as well. I think she was very much like the Queen. When the Queen died, you couldn't imagine a time in your life when the Queen wasn't there. I think it was the same with Grandma as well. We just kind of assumed that she would go on forever. Very hard to imagine a time when she wouldn't be there. Sadly, that time came after over a century, though, of the most incredible life. It's of course, we're sad, but it's difficult not to be appreciative and just thankful for an incredible and a very long and good life. I don't have to do justice to 100+ years in a short space of time, but I just want to share really a few recollections and a few thoughts. Not just of Grandma, but of course my late grandpa, Sidney Bookin, as well, who my own oldest son is named after. So I want to share a few memories and thoughts, some of the ways that she was an inspiration to so many of us. Until very recently, when the lady that got in trouble for asking someone at the garden party, "Where'd you come from?" Now, I know there's a lot of layers to that, but when you go to Jewish gatherings, the first thing people say is, "Where'd you come from? Where did you grow up? Where did grandparents come from?" So people would say, "Where'd you come from?" Say, "Well, I grew up in Oxford, but my mum's from Manchester." And I quickly learned to say, "Have you heard of Mrs. Bookin?" And people would say, "Oh, wow, yes." And usually, at least 50% of the time, she taught me or somebody in the family. So that was, instant recognition. I have to say, recent years, not quite as much. But that was always an instant, recognition, instant yes. You only had to mention Mrs. Bookin, someone who knew her, and always had something to say about them. They touched so many lives. family, extended family, friends, pupils up to, I think, the third generation. And it's the tributes and the thank yous and the good wishes were phenomenal. And also just want to say a huge thank you to so many friends and to dear family members, and very much to the Manchester Jewish community for the way that they looked after Mrs. Bookin. My mum certainly going up and down the motorway the last few years, but none of us were local, and even, I must say, when we were in Liverpool, we didn't get here as often as we should have. It's something I have to actually ask her Matilda for. But the family and the friends and a lot of the former pupils really stepped up for Grandma. Start mentioning people, we're going to get in trouble, but a special mention to the Creek family, to Ian and Vivian, and to the boys who were so devoted and visited regularly. Auntie Marley, Uncle Alan, Oliver Sholem was so kind to Grandma and always visited. Remember when she was in hospital, the kindness and the devotion which they showed. Janice and David would stop and make kiddish for her every week for a number of years, and all the other family and friends and the community that really did so much for her. Very fond memories of Shabbos afternoon and tea parties at 10 Secondary Park Road with all the family around, and so many other occasions, so many other family and friends as well, too many to mention. Many years ago, I visited Grandma when she was in hospital, and we've got the train that came with a couple of older boys, and we got there and there was a crowd there, and they actually said, "Oh, your grandson's here, we'll leave you to it," but they didn't, they stayed. And I remember I was slightly annoyed, and then I was annoyed with myself, because I thought, you know what, we're going to get back on the train. All these people stay here. They made a rota. They made sure that she was looked after and cared for. And that was the case throughout her life. It really was incredible. And that doesn't happen in every community. So just a huge thank you for the passage, and the kindness and the love that so many of you showed to her and to all of the family. Growing up, whenever we visited Grandma and Grandpa, there were always pupils who were having extra lessons. I never worked out if Manchester had a disproportionate number of kids that needed help with homework, or perhaps it was just they wanted to go to Mrs. P. I don't know what it was, but there were always children learning. She was ahead of her time. They don't call it anymore. They used to call it remedial teaching. I think she famously got invited to Buckingham Palace in recognition of her role of providing help to those who needed extra help. There is a custom, I don't know how widespread it is. There are two customs I've come across regarding making coffins, making an urn. One is that I think for sort of Rebbe and Rabbonim, they would take the stender that the person who preached from and taught from during their lifetimes and use the wood to make the coffin. And the other one I've come across is there was a minhag that you would use somebody's dining table around which they had many guests to make that. And I don't know if we do that nowadays, but it's a beautiful idea that the guests you have and the things you taught, that actually their dining table was both. Because it was a place of hospitality, it was also a place of learning and of study. And I still meet people. Just a few weeks ago, I bumped into Jonathan Hoves. He was just remembering, his lessons with my grandma. And then I remembered Susan and Robert, and what a great doctor Robert was, and all these people from her past. Really quite incredible.
Sure.
And it's easy to forget that she was actually 101. I was thinking back to when I got engaged 21 and a half years ago, and Grandma, I must have been nearly 80 at the time, flew out to New York. She came to our time, and I think Mum was saying she had more energy than my parents did on that occasion. She came to Liverpool in 2011, age of nearly 90, to see my doctor, Rabbi Sack. And until relatively recently, she would travel to Israel several times a year, often until sadly we lost her with her dear friend Bella Ansel, of course. And really, she didn't let her age ever get in the way of anything. My wife remembers when we first got married, and we would make time to go, and we would stay for a couple of days with Grandma. We would call up and say, "We'd like to come and see you." They will, "Don't come this week because I've got a bar mitzvah on Monday. I'm not home," basically. She'd have something every night, and she wasn't around. She was always out of sympathy. Often the grandchildren of her original pupils, very, very special indeed, and really quite unique. We try to learn something from the weekly parsha. This week we read Matthew, the very long Fedra. In it, we read about the 42 journeys that the Israel, the children of Israel, took from the land of Egypt into the promised land. So I'm sure we all know that we're often told the Torah doesn't waste words, right? We know when it comes to milk and meat, there's about 5 words to tell us something that leads to hundreds of laws and halachas. And yet, when it comes to the journey, We have a whole column in the Torah of 42 journeys. They left A and went to B. They left B and went to C. I took a train today. Some of the places I remember, because I remember from my childhood, I think Stockport, Crewe, Stafford. I couldn't tell you what order. I don't remember exactly. Because thank God, when you get stuck, you remember. I got stuck in Crewe once. I remember that. But otherwise, you don't really remember. You don't remember. You think about your final destination. Israel left Egypt and they got to Promised Land. The rest is kind of commentary, irrelevant. Why use so many words? So my theory, which I came up with myself, I'm sure it's mentioned somewhere, is because there's a very important lesson in this. And the lesson is that sometimes when you get to your final destination, whether that's on a train journey or whether obviously slightly more spiritual terms, a day like today when we are consecrating and marking my grandma's final physical resting place in this world, it's easy to forget the stops along the way. I think the Torah is telling us not to do that. The Torah is saying that every single journey, every single chapter is important. And I would add to that, the people that you meet along the way are important as well. Even just looking around today, there are people from different points in our lives, in my grandma's life, some more recent friends, some older friends, family, community. Some people, of course, sadly have moved on. And they are all important. They all played an important role in her life. And it's so precious to look back and remember each chapter. We should never forget the people that help us along the way at different stages in our life. There's so much more we could say, but just to conclude, we know that Pirkei Avos, which we read at the moment in the afternoons, Shabbos afternoons, tells us that there are three pillars the world stands on: Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Hasadim. Torah, of course, is Jewish learning and Yiddishkeit. Avodah is usually explained as davening and prayer. Perhaps you can add to that emunah and belief in Hashem and in Hashgacha Pratis, that everything that happens is from God. And Gemilas Hasadim, which of course is Chesed, acts of kindness. So when it came to Torah and learning, she loved Judaism and she loved Jewish learning. They'd always been very committed, my grandparents. Always seen that throughout their life. Remember, actually, my grandpa was the one that taught me after my bar mitzvah to put on tefillin. I remember I was very taken as a child. I've been disabused of this since. As a child, the idea that grandpa would get up early and go to shul every morning. So for us, you went to shul once a week, which is quite good. Some people don't do that, right? But the idea that he would actually go to shul every morning early, put on his tefillin. I remember that. Of course, we had to table with the late Dr. Ansel, his dear friend, and others. And they were always committed, but particularly after grandpa's passing some time ago, she really embraced her learning and her commitment. She started to cover her hair. She took on other things. She really became very, very sort of deeply recommitted to Judaism. And I know actually she used to keep, until certainly recently, she would have a chumash at home, which was always open to Seder of the week. A number of years ago, when the boys from Babich Yeshiva would come on a Friday afternoon and knock on the door, she would tell them very proudly, "I know what this week's parsha is," and they would discuss it. She got a real joy and a real pleasure from that. Not to mention, of course, her teaching, of course. But also later years, she got involved in OYY school, earlier Soviet. I think she was officially the head teacher, actually, which gave her a whole new lease of life in her 80s. And it also gave her a whole new set of friends and a whole new set of people and admirers. She really loved that school and her involvement and the chance it gave her to reconnect again. So that's just some of the education and the Torah. When it came to Avodah, when it came to davening, I know that until very recently she davened every day. This was something really precious to her. A couple of years ago, she asked me to get her a larger siddur, which we did, so that she could continue with her daily davening. That was really important to her deep faith and her deep commitment. Gemilas Hasadim, where do we even start? Both of my grandparents, we're just reminiscing a number of names we recognize on this board, family members or distant family members, particularly that gave service to the Hebrew Kadisha. My own grandpa, of course, and Ian, your father and grandparents. Both of my grandparents gave so much in so many different ways. We know that it says, of course, that honoring your parents is something that brings you long life. I remember in my own life when great-grandpa Michael Heim was living with my grandparents, who weren't that young at the time either, in the later years. And also, I think grandpa's parents also, right? Bookin lived with them for a period of time, and they looked after them, and they made sure that everything was done with dignity and with kavod. It was actually an act of chesed that brought my grandparents together, because the Hayim family were living in Coventry at the time. They used to host Jewish servicemen for Friday night dinner, and that's where Grandma and Grandpa met. So very fitting. And as they say, the rest is history. There was her involvement with emunah. You know, recently we hosted a fascinating rabbi. He's the first, I think, ordained Ethiopian rabbi in Israel. You may have come across Dr. Shalom, and he's absolutely amazing. He spent the Shabbos with us. It was a real privilege. And we were chatting, and somehow something came up, and he said, "Oh, he'd grown up in an Emunah home." I said, "Oh, my grandma was very involved in Emunah." I mentioned my grandma. I think I mentioned Mrs. Ansel, and he said he remembered me. I showed him a picture. He said I met them once when they came on a mission, and he said, "You know what Emunah did for us was life-saving. That was just one snapshot, one sort of chance. There's no chance, but one meeting, just one of the many things. There are so many different connections, and we could probably talk all day. But those are just a few of the reflections. It was a real privilege to have known and to have been certainly her grandson, to have grown up and seen both my grandparents, the way their commitment to Judaism, their commitment to family, and their commitment to community. And I think it's probably rubbed off on all of us. Certainly the foundation stone that they laid. So whilst today is a sad occasion, it's also, of course, a celebration of a century of incredible life on so many different levels. I'm sure we all have different memories, we all have different things. I know certainly for us, and speaking to my cousins and to all the grandchildren, she was always incredible inspiration to us in everything that she did. She'll be very much missed, but it's a privilege to be here. And thank you all for being here to pay your respects. And please God, we should all meet and own your sympathy.